Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right, we're live. Henry Ferguson, welcome to the podcast.
How you doing, Beau?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good. This one's been a little while coming, huh?
I know. I feel like it's been like that with the last couple of guests that I've had. Like it'll be something where, like, for you, I met, well, Clint Casper, our mutual friend, has been telling me, he's like, you got to get Henry on. He's been telling me that for years, but I like to get to have some sort of a, meet them a little bit or have some sort of introduction. We happened to be at Total Archery Challenge together in Colorado last year.
Yep.
And after I got that, we spent, I don't know, felt like a couple hours talking stories and everything. And I was like, I need to get you on. And then the schedules just kind of got busy towards the end of summer there, and we couldn't link up at the event. I've come to learn that at those events, it's really difficult to like pull away when you have other obligations to go and like do a podcast or do whatever. So, but anyways, long story short, it's been a long time coming, and I'm excited to be able to have you on.
Yeah, me too. I'm always down to talk hunting. That's never something that I struggle to find the time for.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I text or I messaged you kind of short notice where I was just like, hey, what's your schedule look like this time of year? You're like, mornings are good, and I'm like, what about, like, I think it was like couple days. You're like, yeah, let's do it. I'm like,
let's
perfect.
Do it. Yeah. No, it's we've got a lot going on this time of year, but you just kind of roll with it and make your way through. So that's why I find early mornings are kind of my time that I can make something happen. And as it turns out, I'm usually going on hikes early mornings this time of year, or hitting the archery range. But as it turns out, this rain that has just not stopped for us, it just poured rain last night. So the trails were going to be a total mud hole today anyway. So this was perfect timing.
Well, why don't you send some of that rain out here? Because at the time of recording this, the beginning of June here, we haven't had rain in like almost a month. And it's really bad as far as like everything's just so dry. And, selfishly, I mean, the farmers really have to deal with the brunt of it, but selfishly, I'm looking at antler growth, and I need some of these. I need these browse sources to be luscious and green and have everything ready.
Relatable. I view the whole world through a hunting lens as well, Beau. So, it's kind of weird because we're usually in that mode. I mean, it usually starts to look pretty arid and brown out here within another week or two out, here in Colorado. And my gosh, it looks like Ireland right now. It's just so lush and green. I mean, I took a picture of a deer yesterday, and I legitimately thought my wife and I were going for a hike at a park pretty near our house. And as we were driving out there, I see this buck, and I thought he was bedded, because he was just barely, you could just barely see his head and antlers above the grass. I'm like, oh, he's bedded out there. So I grabbed my phone to take a picture, and that's what he took. A couple steps. I'm like, oh my gosh, that grass is so high. He's not bedded. He's standing out there. So yeah, it's pretty wild. It's a unique thing for us. And, we've had several years of pretty bad drought, so we'll take it. And everybody downstream from us will take it. Lake Powell, Lake Mead, Southern California. I mean, we're kind of the headwaters for a lot of people's water sources.
Yeah. So talking about it, not worrying about people, but thinking about the hunting perspective, what does that do for this fall with you guys having so much water?
Well, I'm sure hoping it means that all those little bucks that I saw last year get all the nutrients they need, and they just explode this year. Because last year was bleak, man. It was legitimately, it was one of the worst years I've ever seen for antler development. I mean, I've hunted the same general area in a group of a couple different units there off and on for actually 20 years. And it was the worst antler development I've ever seen. And so that was super frustrating for me. I mean, you put in the time, you get up early in the morning, go scouting. And when I say get up early, I mean, I'm up at 2:30, 3 o'clock to go get out there, get up on the mountain and start scouting. And we just couldn't find a decent buck. It was super frustrating.
Yeah, no,
So
that makes sense. I mean, we see that same type of thing with, out here in the East, even with whitetails and everything. Like the deer that I'm hunting in Pennsylvania in the big woods, it's like they rely on that browse. Like that's what they are. There's no fields around, there's no food plots, there's no
same
crops.
here.
It's just like it's kind of similar to, similar but different, but as far as like the mule deer that you're, focusing on in the West, and it's like water, having precipitation, like having a wet summer kind of sucks as far as outdoor plans, but I look forward to what the fall looks like once that
Yeah.
happens.
Well, and in the areas I'm hunting, there's no agriculture. Well, I mean, it is Colorado. There's probably some jackass with a weed grow out there, but that's if you want to consider that a food plot, or I mean, I've heard it called hippie lettuce, so maybe that would be kind of a food plot, but
Yeah.
but that's it, man. I mean, there's no ag, there's none of that in the areas that I'm hunting. So yeah, same deal. If it's not growing, if Mother Nature's not growing it out there, they're not eating it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
and
we're pretty moisture dependent.
well, I know last year when I hunted Montana and I spent 3 weeks out there hunting elk, it was super dry. Like the beginning of the hunt, it was 100 and some degrees. There was no water anywhere except for these cattle tanks, and that's kind of like where the water sources and a few small spring seeps that I ended up finding. But one, it was difficult for me personally to be able to get water, but it was also, that's where the elk kind of had to be. The drawback to that was, any other people that knew the areas also knew where those water sources were, and they had tree stands packed back in there, that were hung over the wallows or any of those tanks. Like it made it kind of difficult. I mean, I think it wasn't until, I don't know, it was like 15, 16 days into the hunt before we got any rain, and it was just like, it was ridiculous how dry it was.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't have a ton of evidence from, like watching bucks year to year to year and charting antler growth, but I have some anecdotal evidence of it. And like a buck that I shot in 2020, that was as dry. That was another super dry year. We've had, like I said, we've had a few years in a row of pretty bad drought. 2021 wasn't quite as bad, but 2020 was bad. And I had been watching this buck since 2018. And when I first spotted him, he was a good 4x4. He was obviously pretty young, but he was a good 4x4, decent mass, big deep forks, and real narrow. And this buck, I mean, I've never seen anything like him. He just stayed on this one ridge line, and he was the most predictable deer I think I've ever seen. And so anyway, it was kind of funny because in 2019, I watched him in 2018, and I'm like, man, that buck has got a ton of potential. If he puts on a little width, that buck could be really something special. Well, 2019, I came back in there, and sure enough, same hillside, feeding out there. And I mean, he was always the latest buck up feeding, and he was almost always by himself. So I'm like, man, if I ever get an opportunity at this deer, I like my chances. Those loner bucks, those solo bucks are so much more vulnerable without having all their buddies there as backup,
Yeah.
So I sat there watching this buck. And 2019, I found another buck that I liked just a little more. And I kept thinking, boy, he's got that potential, and I'm going to give him another year. And by the way, me giving him another year is for the most part pointless because, I'm hunting public land. Just because I gave him another year doesn't mean the first guy who sees him in muzzleloader season or second or third or fourth rifle season isn't going to go, oh my gosh, and just
Yeah.
shoot him. But so anyway, 2019, he looked real good. And then 2020 was another just real bad drought year. There was just nothing with any sort of size. And so I went back in there looking for that buck, and he put on a ton of mass that year, but never got the width. I mean, I think he was 21, 22 inches wide, but never put on the width. He was a nice tall buck, deep forks, but just a lot of mass. He was like 40 and a half inches of mass, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's these bucks, you watch them from year to year. And I still believe, in fact, I know that he was bigger in 2019. I should have shot him that year, but I just kept thinking, man, next year. And when I got him aged, he was 6.5 years old. So
Okay. Yeah.
he's a good mature buck. And honestly, I don't know that had I left him. Well, first of all, I'm positive that had I left that buck, had I passed him, he was going to get shot. So, but it's kind of the game you play. I mean, it's a risk reward thing. And, but yeah, never did get that width that I was hoping for, but he ended up grossing 182. So, I mean, he was a good deer, a real good deer, but just who knows what could have been had he had a couple decent moisture cycles somewhere in his life.
Yeah. Well, I know that buck from just seeing it on your Instagram, and it's one of the most unique mule deer that I've seen in a while. Like, I don't know, traditional mule deer, they start to go kind of wider as they get older and bigger and big forks, and he's just like, he just went like this, tight, and goes straight up, and just like gnarly mass to him the whole way through. Like, that's such a cool buck with that kind of character.
It was pretty funny because one of my friends, Isaac Alleman, he's a big mule deer guy, and he stopped by it on his way to a hunt here 2 years ago, and he saw that buck on the wall, and he goes, "My gosh, dude, pictures do that buck no justice whatsoever." So it's just one of those deer that, even on the wall, we're in a constant like Jenga game of moving, or Tetris or whatever, moving antlers around the front room because we're a little full. But yeah, I moved the deer, and the new spot he's hung in, you've got to look at it from like one angle to really appreciate what he is. And so,
it's funny. Like, I've always, like, my goal at some point is like, I want a house where I have big ceilings so I can put mounts up there. Like, that's my number one thing that I want in a house. I don't care about anything else. But then sometimes I see that, and like my uncle has that, and it's like you can't get the full view of what these deer are when they're up high and you're looking at it. It's like that makes it kind of harder.
So
like right now,
I want. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, right now I was kind of redoing my office and figuring out how I wanted to put it up so I don't have anything on the wall. And then in my living room, I tried not to make it look like Smithsonian with deer heads and all this stuff all over. So like my basement just stacked with mounts and stuff just sitting there on chairs and tables. Yeah. And I'm like, I got to figure out what to do with these things and to be able to really appreciate them and be able to put them there. But I know what you mean as far as like some of those deer. There's a whitetail I shot in 2009. He was 9.5 years old, but he was only 13 inches wide, and he had gnarly mass and narrow and tall rack, but kind of reminded me of that from a whitetail's perspective. And he's like, you just have to see him to get the appreciation. You see a picture of it, it's like, okay, it's a nice buck, but it's like when you just see this, big, heavy, just narrow kind of looking deer, but it's a cool, it's got those features that you got to see in person to be able to appreciate.
Exactly. And that's why, getting back to that whole vaulted ceiling thing, we've got vaulted ceilings in our front room, and it's, pretty much lined with antlers. But between myself, my wife, and my son all hunting, I mean, we do pretty well, and we put a few of them up there. But my dream trophy room now would have like 10-foot ceilings at most, but it would just be long. So you can put a lot of stuff on there, because I've got a buck that's like you're saying, I shot a buck with my rifle in 2017. I mean, the absolute, if I had to name that deer, I'd call him the dumb luck buck, because that's exactly what it was for me. I was hunting a little tiny chunk of private, and which is really unique for me because everything I hunt is public. And so I was hunting this little tiny chunk of private in this other spot. And I told my wife at the beginning of it, I said, and it was a rifle tag, and I had to borrow a rifle. I mean, I'm a bow hunter, man. I had to borrow a rifle and figure that out, and figure out what a turret was and how it worked. And so it was pretty funny. We were out there, and I told my wife, I'm like, yeah, I'd really like to get a trashy buck, and she's like, you're hunting a 40-acre chunk of property. And I said, I know. I want a trashy buck. I will take whatever mature buck comes my way. And as it turns out, big trashy buck came through, and I got him. But unfortunately, where he hangs in the front room, it's so high you can't appreciate the cool features of that rack. So yeah, if I could convince my wife that we don't need the giant bookcase in there, and I could, fill everything down a little bit lower, but I don't think that's happening. So.
Well, I guess how I would picture my perfect trophy room is still have the vaulted ceilings, but like this year I'm going on Alaska moose hunt. So if all things go out, work out well, I'll have this big moose that can go up high. You put those bigger animals, maybe the elk, caribou,
exactly,
up high,
yeah,
and then
that's
like
a great idea.
The whitetails, muleys, have those a little lower so you can appreciate them a little bit more, because I still don't like with some of those animals that I'm not as familiar hunting with, say like moose. I've never hunted before. Like they all look freaking big to me. So like having it up there, it's just going to look big. And where, whitetails, mule deer, stuff like that, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to have to, agree. You're making me kind of rethink here what this is going to have to look like.
Yeah. It's all pie in the sky for us here. Anyway, living in Colorado, our friggin' housing costs are so high that,
yeah,
I'm just going to have to continue to make do with what I have. And I'm actually getting ready to redecorate my office here and try to come up with like the ultimate Zoom background against that wall over there.
Yeah.
And in preparation for that, I have, let's see, I have my last two bucks that I've shot, my 2021 and my 2022 buck, shoulder mounted, laying on the floor in my front room now. So they're ready for it. They're just waiting for me to get my crap together. So
yeah, like I said, I have had this wall blank because it painted it dark because it shows up a little bit better and everything. Like I don't know, January, and I'm like, but then I just can't decide how I want to lay it out. So like I got my bear mount you see back there. It's on a pack, just sitting on a shelf. It's not really on the wall, and like I'm just like not sure how I want to.
About as non-committal as you can get. Yeah,
it's a small room, so I don't want to like pack it full of deer heads sort of like around my shoulders when I'm sitting in here. But that's kind of funny. But
yeah, it's hell being a successful hunter, man.
Yeah,
I tell
you. No, but before we go too far deep into this here, Henry, I kind of want you to introduce yourself to everyone here, and I'll start with just kind of saying how I became, I guess, familiar with you. So I had heard your name come up through some like very successful hunters in the West. And then it wasn't until my buddy or mutual friend, Clint Casper, was like, you got to meet Henry. He's an absolute killer from Colorado. Clint's a mule deer, obsessed with mule deer too. And he's like, I've learned so much from this guy. Like you got to meet him. And so started following you on Instagram, Big Chief Whack-a-Buck, and started just like looking through all your photos and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, it's just like automatic every year being able to do it. And what I've I've picked up from afar is just like the amount of work that you put in to hunt these deer and find these deer and photograph these deer, like it's like every successful hunter that I talk to that are consistently successful, they outwork everybody that they outwork most of the people, at least that I see. And that's just what I see from my perspective. So I kind of want to hear your background, how you became obsessed with mule deer, kind of what you have going on.
Sure. So yeah, Henry Ferguson. I've lived in Colorado since '94. I moved out here when I was like 20, and it's been an adventure for me, man. I mean, I've grown up all around the West, and in a lot of places where, I mean, I remember growing up in northern Arizona. That's where I went to like junior high and high school, and so really got into hunting there. Um, I mean, if we saw a mature buck, if we saw a 4 point buck, it was like you'd go back and tell all your friends. It was like the talk of the town. It just wasn't a real deer heavy area. And so we had, that was when Arizona's elk population was really starting to skyrocket and really starting to produce some real quality bulls. But those tags were dang near impossible to get as they remain today. Um, but mule deer always had kind of that mystique for me, that I just seeing a big mature buck was like next level cool for me. So that was something that they always kind of had that spot in my heart. And when I moved out to Colorado in '94, it wasn't until like early 2000s that I really took my hunting a lot more seriously. I was kind of a tournament archer for a long time, and I just didn't make the time for it. That was what it boiled down to. I mean, it just wasn't a priority for me. And I'll tell you, I shot a doe in 2003 with my bow, and it just absolutely triggered something in me. And I haven't been able to get enough of it since. I mean, the next year I shot my first Pope and Young buck, and he was a real nice wide heavy buck with like little crab clawed fronts. And I just kept thinking, man, there was this other buck in that herd that I just wish I could have gotten a shot at. And so it's always that pursuit for one more and another one just a little bigger, and the one the one that got away that haunts you, that just kind of drives me a lot. So yeah, I mean, like you said, I scout a lot. I spend a lot of time looking at deer. I mean, there's a lot of deer, and we live on the edge of town, and there's a lot of resident bucks around here that are just, I mean, big deer, that you can see, but it's all private, and it's all, I mean, these bucks most of them get hit by cars or die of old age. So, there's not much you can do other than look at them and enjoy them and appreciate them. But I do. And I just love watching deer. And I feel like every time I look at deer and watch them feed and watch them interact with each other, I learn a little something about them. And so, yeah, I've been a long time bow hunter. My wife, Stacy, and my son, Kyle, he's 17 now. And my wife, well, I guess she would probably say her age is no concern. But no, we hunt a lot. And so they hunt with rifles, which has worked out really well for me because it allows me to be incredibly rich the whole month of September as I'm doing my archery hunts. So that's kind of worked out real well. And then when it comes time for their hunts, I'm totally focused on their success.
Yeah.
This last year was the first time that I've had a rifle tag during one of their rifle seasons. So, and that worked out fine. Kyle got his buck, and I shot my first elk with a rifle. So shot a cow, and that was a pretty unique experience, man. I mean, I haven't rifle. I'm 49 years old, and that was the first rifle elk tag I've had in my life. Everything's
Really?
been archery. So yeah, it was kind of funny. I didn't, like we talked. I think we talked about this before we started recording, but last year I didn't draw a squat. I didn't draw
Yeah.
a freaking thing, man. I drew an archery antelope tag, which, like I told you, they should just give those to people because the area I hunt's like not a ground blind spot, so it's all spot and stock on wide open prairie with grass that barely covers the top of your boots. And they should hand out archery antelope tags to everybody. Here, go knock yourself out, buddy. have your fun. Make sure you got a lot of arrows
Yeah.
and thick skin, because you're going to come back with your ego wounded. But no, it was pretty fun though. We had, like, Kyle and I both had tags. I went out opening day. He had something going on, wasn't able to make it out opening day, and um, so I went out looking for elk. But really, I was hoping like crazy to find a buck for him and have it ready to go for the next morning. Um, and we got out there that next morning, and he made a freaking spectacular shot on this buck and dropped him. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's I didn't realize that your son was only 17. One,
Yeah.
he looks older, and then like I've seen his success over the years here, and I'm like, man, he's off to a good start.
Yeah, so you can start hunting when you're 12 here in Colorado, and that poor kid, man, when he was 12, he drew zero tags. so so literally, I picked up a reissued elk tag for him, and a cow tag, and he was able to fill his cow tag on like the fifth day of the season. And I mean, that kid hunted his butt off. So I was so glad to see him have this successful hunt. But man, we and then a buddy of mine came through with a landowner tag for us right before fourth season. So that was cool. I mean, we were able to get him his first buck, and little turd's gotten a buck every year that he's hunted. So a couple of and when he was 15, he shot a good buck. I mean, like a really good buck. He shot a 30-inch buck that was like right at 180 gross, just a
Oh,
perfect typical. Like the prototypical buck. When people think of a big mule deer, that tends to be what's on there. What comes to mind.
yeah. No, I remember the picture of that too, just from scrolling through your Instagram and seeing it laying
Stinking
there
kid.
on the ground, just stinking
Yeah.
kid.
Oh yeah. It looks, and I took a picture of it just kind of from the top of the head, so you can see, the whole rack. And man, it looks like you can stick a yardstick in there. But it was 30 right on the money. But
It helps having, a father that is obsessed with it and puts it in. Like I know that is similar to my backstory with, like, my dad is such a big whitetail hunter and best hunter that I know, as far as just putting in the time in. I mean, to this day, he still does 4 times the amount of work that I do, as far as like finding
I
finding
love
these
it.
finding these deer. And like when I was 12, I shot a spike, but 13, I shot this wide, like 21-inch whitetail. It was 8 point at that time. It had won the big buck contest for youth, and like everyone's like, you'll never,
That's
you'll
cool.
never pass that. It was like kind of like, this is a rarity. And as the years went on, I was starting to kill some more, but it was honestly a direct correlation to my dad at that time, of like just like showing me everything and like teaching me all of these things. And we had a hunt, with somebody until you were 16, I believe.
Oh,
And
okay.
so like,
Kind of a mentor sort of situation there. That's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So it helped me learn a lot. And then once it was like, I think I was right after that point is when he kicked me out of the nest, and I, wasn't, it was time, like, all right, you got to go figure it out. I need to take my spots back, sort of deal. And,
Yeah, no kidding.
but I guess what I'm getting at with that is, like, I learned so much by having that mentor, and it sounds like your son with hunting with you is similar to that, and not everybody has that. So I feel really grateful to be able to have that opportunity.
Yeah, it's something that I think it can be a blessing and a curse, because there can be an expectation of what they think their hunt should look like. And dude, I shot does, I shot forkies, getting started, but I was thrilled for the success that I had. And I think that those are steps that I want to make sure that he's not missing out on those, on those experiences and those steps. But I'm convinced right now, if I left him alone next year or this year and said, "Hey, buddy, go get it. I'm gonna stay in camp, climb to a high spot, and text me if you need once you need some help." I'm fully convinced that little kid could he could come out with one, and he may, the biggest difference between, because I'll be honest, Kyle at 17 is basically me at 17. I mean, the attention span of a gnat, thinking more about girls than anything else, and it's kind of funny, but I think the biggest difference in me at 49 and me at 17 is that ability to sit down and glass for hours, and I'm confident that when I when I move from one glassing point to another throughout the morning, I've seen what there is to see there. And if I haven't seen it, then that guy is like the hide and seek champion. That's like the Sasquatch version of a deer. But patience, though, is the biggest difference between, and it's something that I've had to develop over the years. But it's and that's where I think mule deer have been a good teacher for me, because it gives me that opportunity to kind of do something that I'm not comfortable with, because I'm not a super patient person. But if I'm looking for deer, and especially if I know there's a big deer in this area, oh man, I become a very, very patient, methodical person in trying to flush him out and figure out where he is and come up with a plan to put him on the wall.
And it sounds so easy to just sit there and glass, but it is from experience one of the hardest things, because I don't get it, but when I whitetail hunt, I can be an extremely patient person, and I'll sit in a tree dark to dark for 5 days straight, and because I know that it's eventually going to pan out. But for some reason, when I get out to a place where I can see, I'm like I look through the glass, and after like 15 minutes, I'm like, hey, what's, should I be moving? And like, it's so hard to get myself to do that. And, even elk hunting, I learned that, like, I think last year, if I would have used some of my whitetail tactics and just sat some of these places where I knew elk were coming through after being there for so long, seeing some of their patterns, it was like, I could probably have killed an elk in this spot if I would have done this. And I just like struggled
totally possible.
with the mindset of like being patient. But I mean, it's a common trend. I mean, I've talked to you about mule deer hunting. I've talked to Tony Treach, Brian Barney, Clint. Like, I've talked to some pretty good hunters that they all have similar, they talk about the patience aspect and how important glassing is, and the idea of covering all of that ground and looking at it differently. It's obviously so important.
Well, and I'll speak on behalf of myself and Brian Barney at the very least. I know Tony and Clint are probably way better at sitting in tree stands than us, but man, that to me, I can't imagine how you can sit in one spot and wait for that deer to come by. But the funny thing is, we're both sitting. We're both staying pretty stationary and using our eyes and our senses to come up with these bucks. But, the difference is, we're just changing our scenery more often. But the fact is, you guys, you're sitting in that spot for a reason. There's a deer there. There's a buck there that you're looking for. It's sitting in a stand on total speculation that I could not. I don't think I would excel at that. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And then our And like our trail cameras are kind of like you're glassing because the woods are thick, so you can't really glass. So it's like, okay, this is what I'm using as intel to like try to put yourself in those places and the sign reading aspect. But it's funny. But there are more comparisons than I would have thought. And my cousin Mason's a perfect example. He is one of the best whitetail killers that I know, but he has way more of a passion for hunting mule deer out west. And he's like, I've become a better whitetail hunter from mule deer hunting because he's like, I'm looking at the landscape just without the trees on it, essentially, in some of these places.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm watching how the deer shift beds. And he's like, I believe whitetails do the same thing throughout the day, even though we think they just go lay in this brush pile for all day until it's the last hour. He's like, no, they're getting up and they're browsing and they're moving and the wind's shifting and they're changing beds. And it's really helped translate over to the whitetail standpoint.
Yeah. And I have really hunted whitetails enough for any of those skills to transfer over just because I just haven't really done it. But yeah, it's funny because hunting is hunting in a lot of respects, you know. And I'm convinced that if you drop somebody in a spot that is a great hunter, they're going to find a way. You give them maybe it might take them a season or two, but they're going to find a way to find success. And you know, it's just a matter of I think you kind of develop that. I don't know if it's killer instinct. I don't know if that's the right phrase at all, but you know, it's like, for me, it took me a long time to figure out how to kill a deer. I mean, it truly did, like an embarrassingly long time. But I was largely self-taught. You know, I mean, my dad passed away when I was 12, and I went on one hunt with him when I was like 8 or 9. I still remember some details of that hunt, and so I mean, you know, I'm grateful he did. But what I'm saying, was largely self-taught. You know, so for me, I approached hunting differently. I approached it more like you know, now there's a name for it. You know, I guess I was more of an adult onset hunter, even though I'd killed a deer and a couple turkeys when I was in high school. You know, I kind of found my way back to it later. But the reason I'm saying this is as I developed and figured out how to kill a deer, I killed a deer again the next year. You know, I went from that doe, like I said, to a Pope and Young buck the next year. And the only reason I didn't get one the following year is I was just looking to top it. I was looking for bigger and better the next year. And then I started and I'm like, you know what? This isn't why I hunt. This isn't it. So I started hunting the experience and just, you know, hey, if I see a buck that gets my heart rate elevated, man, I'm going for it, you know. But so like this year, I told you the tag draws have been pretty darn good to the Ferguson family this year. So yeah. I cashed in 13 elk points, drew a good tag out in Utah. So that'll be a cool hunt for me. And then I drew a general deer hunt, a general deer tag to go in that same unit. So I'll have an archery deer and elk tag out there. Oh. But you know, so I mean, I'll be looking for a bigger bull. But man, I mean, for deer, I'm hunting a spot that I'm not familiar with. I don't have any pre-scouted bucks. So it's going to be a little different for me. I'm going to go out there, and if I find a buck that's in a cool spot that, you know, he's a mature deer, I'm going to go for it. And, you know, that's kind of, it's going to be a different experience for me. Cause in Colorado, I mean, I'm hunting bucks that I know, that I've scouted, that I've watched for, you know, most of them, I've watched them over a couple of years, or, you know, sometimes you'll get a cool moisture year and you get a buck that just blows up out of nowhere, you know, but for the most part, I've watched these bucks over a year or two and kind of know which ones I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point too. I know, like for myself, I typically hold myself to a higher standard in Pennsylvania, which the rack size isn't really traditionally comparable to what you see in the Midwest, but for an older age class deer, because I spend the most time here scouting, I start to know the areas, and I feel like I need to push myself a little more. But then there's sometimes I go on out of state trips or whatever, and I know nothing about it, and it's like I'm hunting the experience, and I don't think I deserve to be able to shoot a big one. Now, I would be perfectly happy if that's what happened, but like,
That's why you're there.
some guys had asked me as 2021, I'd killed my biggest archery buck in Pennsylvania on opening day, and then 2 weeks later, I drove to New York, and I wanted to kind of hunt off the ground and doing a little bit of spot and stalk in the timber, and I shot this young, small buck on the first day. It was the only day I was going to be hunting up there, and they were like, well, how do you go from doing this? And I'm like, that was the first buck that I'd shot on the ground, saw him feeding there, slipped in to 38 yards and put a good arrow, packed him out. And it was like, that was just as exciting as the other one. It was just different scenarios. And same thing with like mule deer. Like I've only ever hunted mule deer once, and I ended up being in the hospital from elevation sickness. But so this year I got a South Dakota mule deer tag, and it's like, my goals aren't to shoot
elevation problems there.
No, I know. I'm pumped about that. But, I'm not, my goal isn't to shoot this, giant buck. Now, obviously I would love that, but I want to shoot something that's representative and looks like a mule deer buck. Like I don't have the skills. I don't have the experience to feel like I should, that's a realistic goal to go in there and shoot 170-inch deer. Who knows? They might not even be there, but like, it's just, for me, I try to look at everything differently. I don't like put blanket statements on anything that I do. It's kind of situational, and try to learn to be better. And then, maybe 5 years down the road and I pull that tag every year, I feel more confident and going after some bigger ones. And then I'll, do that then. Like you were talking about that buck that you shot in 2020, and you said, maybe someone would have shot it in 2018. That would have been me if I was there. I would have been trying to shoot that deer.
And you know what? You would have been perfectly within your rights and within your right mind to do it. I mean, he was a nice buck.
Yeah.
But it was funny. I had a couple friends stock that buck in 2018 and 2019. And, now knowing what I know now, I'm sure glad that those stocks blew up on them. Because, I just feel like big bucks look better on my wall than anywhere else. And, I feel like, and this is totally myopic and stupid of me, but I just feel like I should have a chance at every big buck. That's how I want it to be. But no, I love chasing them, man. It's something that, and then and the coolest part is being able to kind of develop that history with them, watch them for a year or two, or even if you just see that buck that just blows up during the summer and you just watch them all summer. That was how my first big buck was. As it turns out, I shot him in 2013. And as it turns out, I did see him in 2012. In fact, I saw him in 2012. I didn't even draw a tag that year for the units that I like to hunt, but my buddies did. So I was just out there helping them. And, I was out there helping them with tags in my pocket for a different unit. And I eventually shot a little buck the last weekend of the hunt, and I was thrilled to have it. But I was out there hunting with my buddy Tim, and we were just kind of working this ridge line, looking glassing beds midday, and we didn't approach this rock correctly, like at all. We totally screwed this up. And as we walked up on this rock, this buck blows out from like 10, 15 feet away from us and takes off running. Big, tall buck, deep forks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, man, that buck, that's a big deer. And he was a big deer. He was probably, I'm betting he was probably low 80s that year, maybe high 70s, but he was a real good buck. And I ended up killing him the next year when he was just a little bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was 194 gross green.
Oh.
So yeah, he was a big typical, no cheaters, just a straight slick 4x4 with eye guards. But yeah, and the funny thing is, where I ended up shooting that buck, I'll bet it was maybe 300 to 400 yards away from that rock where we blew him out that day. So it's kind
Really?
of funny. Yeah. I mean, you know, mule deer don't necessarily like follow the same game trail like a whitetail does,
Hmm.
but there's still some habits in there, and there's a home range and a home territory that if you figure out where that is, you've got a good shot of staying on that buck. And if they aren't shot, you've got a good chance of seeing them there year after year.
That's what I was just gonna ask you. Like I know with whitetails, like there's trends that I'll find. Like I'm super analytical on. I'll get either whether it's personal sightings or trail camera data. Like okay, this buck showed up to this area around this time. I look kind of at the weather conditions. The time of year, is it the rut? What's making him come through here? And a lot of times, if conditions are similar the following year, right around that date, he'll show back up. Do you see any similar trends with mule deer like that?
No, I can't really say I've seen anything that specific. Well, actually, you know what? Yeah, I can. I told you we live by a state park here, and there's not as many deer in there as there used to be, but there tend to be a couple of real whoppers that come through there. And there's one buck that shows up the third week of October. And I mean, I can set my watch to this buck showing up like the third week of October. And our rut here is usually the second, third week of November. I find it peaks here right around November 18th, 19th, 20th, right in that neighborhood. Um, but this buck shows up every year, and it's funny because I watch that spot all year round. And once he shows up, he'll show up, he'll chase does for a month, and typically he'll just disappear back into the oak brush and go about his big buck life, and won't see him again until next October. So I remember seeing this buck once the first week of August, and I'm like, where the hell did you come from? Like, what? You don't, looking at my watch, well, you're way early.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, we do see a little bit of that, but
Interesting. So to kind of transition a little bit more, when you're talking about, finding deer and you like to scout a lot, I know like for me, when I look at whitetails, and I've honestly taken this to elk hunting a little bit too, but like when I'm trying to find spots, I always like to have at least 5 areas that I know, and like I can work through this hunt plan of like
yeah,
things that aren't working out. But I've also like taken it a step further where I have like, say if I have 5 areas, I'll have like one that's like a pretty difficult to access one that's kind of back in, like traditionally you'd think that there wouldn't be people back in there. And then, I'll have one that's kind of moderate, and then maybe 3 that are like easier to access or I can get to quickly and be able to kind of move along there. And I know just from talking to you and stuff before, it sounds like a lot of the places that you like to hunt are ones that you can get to relatively. When I say easily, I don't mean like it's easy to get there, but you can like say drive to it and cover a lot of ground without, say backpacking in 8 or 9 miles, and then you're stuck to one specific spot. Does that sound kind of
yep,
correct?
very accurate. Yeah, yeah. I don't kill much on backpacking hunts. I've taken a deer or two on it. And that's cool. I'll hunt them wherever I need to and by whatever means necessary. But yeah, we bought a camp trailer 2 years ago, and I'll tell you what, that has been just like the most pleasant, life-changing experience for me to be able to hunt in actual comfort.
Yeah.
And now what that means though is that I'm driving, I'm going to be driving early mornings and late nights. And what it also means is that I'm going to be hiking more because I'm not staying back in there where they live.
Yep.
And there's pros and cons to that because you're keeping less scent in there. You're not in there preparing food and stuff like that, snoring in the middle of the night and scaring everything away. But you know, so there are pros and cons. But that's and again, that's the cons. I mean, or that's the pros. But the cons are you're going to be hiking in and out a lot. So, but I'm cool with that. I mean, that's just part of the hunt for me is, putting some miles on the boots. I mean, I've usually got well over 100 miles on my boots before I kill a deer, through a season. And that's, hiking in and out of glassing spots, switching glassing points. And, you know, that's just kind of, I'm not, I've always told everybody I'm not a great hunter. I'm just really persistent. And, eventually if I feel like now, I mean, I've got like a 15 or 16-year streak of killing a deer with my bow. I feel like now it's inevitable if I do my part, if I stay out there, if I blow off work for, long periods of time in a row. And I do. But that's that's what it means to me. I mean, that's my time, and that's my vacation time. That's my time that I truly, that I enjoy a lot. And so yeah, I'll make the sacrifices that I need to be able to get work done up ahead of that and after that. And that's what it means to me.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you think of, at least when I first thought of truck camping and like doing that style hunting, I thought it was just like, oh, this is an easier way to do it. And like, cause the first time
Yeah.
I went elk hunting in Colorado, I backpacked in first time, which I don't recommend anybody doing that for their first
Nope.
hunt.
I don't
And
either.
it was very difficult, but I had read Cam Haynes's book, which was like the best thing for me as far as it inspired me to go do this and get into it. But I just don't
Yeah.
think that for me it was the best option to go at the beginning, because there's a whole nother aspect you have to add into living in the backcountry versus focusing on hunting and honing those skills of it. And after 2 or 3 years of doing that, I went to Idaho and I was like changing it up, setting up truck camp, put a rooftop tent in my truck, and I was like, I'm going to sleep here and I'm going to just go into spots. Well, one thing, I hiked a lot more because you had to, like you said, to get into these spots, and you had to get up earlier. You were back at camp later at night. Like that was an aspect that I didn't really truly understand, that it was going to be like that. It was, it was harder work from that aspect, but it allowed me to be more mobile for somebody like me. That's like, I need chances, because I need opportunities, because I'm not always the best if I have one opportunity of making it happen. I'm just not there yet. And I need at bat, so to speak, and to be able to get it. And I learned from that with that elk hunt, and you're talking about having like a camper like trailer there. So I'm actually having one built right now. It's actually done, but it's at a show. So this local off-road shop had approached me about, like, they said, well, I had talked to them about, I was like, man, I want a hunting trailer that's like, but I said, there's not, one, they're really expensive that are on the market, and two, there was nothing that I felt was like exactly what I wanted. So I worked with them.
Fit for you. Yeah.
I worked with him on a design, and this guy's super talented, and he built it. He built it to kind of the specs, and then he made it actually work. Mine was just a drawing on a piece of paper, essentially.
Yeah.
What I thought would be good, because I wanted something I could go and drop it off and have, a camp kitchen that folds out. I could put my rooftop tent on that, so it's not on my truck all the time, and have it take it down and set it there, and having water and extra fuel, and be able to keep your coolers there, all this stuff. And the shop, Hardcore Off-Road, and they were like, yeah, they're like, let's build you one, have you test it, find the flaws in it, and then he's gonna eventually sell these types of
others. Yeah, sure.
So I was like, I'm really excited to because once I started doing that and having the comfort of this nice pad versus the little climate,
Gosh,
oh,
come on.
God, is that nice? I don't care what anybody says. That is the best thing ever,
dude. It's life changing. It's life changing. And Beau, I didn't get mine until I was 47. So yeah. I mean, truly having that ability to get a comfortable good night's sleep, having that ability to, and really, I think the most important aspect of it it allows me, and you touched on this, but I'm just gonna reemphasize that point. It allows me to be more mobile. It allows me, if I'm in this one spot and I've got a deer scouted in there, but somebody else shows up. Hey, it's public land. It's just as much theirs as mine, or somehow. But it allows me to say, okay, forget it. I'm going to go other side of the mountain this time. I'm going to go north. I'm going to go south. Because you've touched on a few of my really kind of the tactics that I use of having, 4 or 5 bucks in 4 or 5 different spots that I can hunt. So if I get in there and man, I mean, I've watched deer. I hunted a buck in 2010 that, my gosh, eh, I wish I could hunt that deer in 2023, because I'm absolutely positive I would kill that buck. I spent an obscene amount of time obsessed with this deer, and rightfully so. He was big. He was big. He ended up scoring 201 and 6/8. How do I know? Because he got shot on the rifle hunt. And the guy who shot him is actually has become a very good friend of mine, actually through this story. But I hunted that buck like it was my job for 3 weeks, and I never got it. I never got to full draw on this stupid deer. Called stupid deer. I mean, that's out of anger. That's not a description of his intelligence, because trust me, he survived the archery season unscathed, and I'm the stupid hunter. But I had stock after stock on this buck, and one of the things I learned was patience there. I learned that just because I saw that deer didn't mean I was going to have a stalking opportunity, a legit stalking opportunity. And one, in fact, gosh, it was probably the 5th or 6th time I'd stalked this deer, that one season. And so in full disclosure, I wasn't even stalking that deer. I had given up. So screw it. I'm just going to go. I found another real nice mature buck. He's probably a mid 170s buck. I'm like, I'm going to go kill that deer, just to prove to myself that I know how to hunt deer. So I watched, and I watched this buck feed. I watched him feed for like an hour and a half, and he was by himself. This is very important to the story. I watched him for an hour and a half and saw 0 other deer with him. And I'm like, yep, that deer's going home with me. I'm going to kill that buck. So I saw him go down on the backside of this little ridge, and he never came back. I'm like, okay, he's bedded there, because every other deer had bedded an hour before. That he finally disappeared back there. I watched again for about a half hour, never reappeared. I'm like, he's bedded. I'm gonna come right over the top of that ridge, and I know that little draw that he's in, it's real small. He's pretty much going to be in bow range when I pop over the top there. So I sneak down in there, and keep in mind, I've watched for an hour and a half and I've seen 0 other deer with him. So I sneak over the top of the hill. I get to this big burnt out stump, and I come up right behind that stump. I mean, Bo, this stock is working perfectly. Wind's in my favor. Sun's at my back. I mean, he's gonna be looking straight up into the rising sun when he this is going my way. I step over the top of that ridge, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know how close he was, but he was no more than 10 yards away. All of a sudden, deer stand up everywhere. The big buck I'd been after for 3 weeks is right in the middle of the herd, and he is close. Stands, glances back my direction, and is gone. 13 bucks took off out of that little draw, that little tiny draw, with the one buck that I was stalking that day being the last one up. And he looked around for a second, but no time for a shot, and took off. I kid you not, Bo. I lost it that day. I mean, I freaking lost it. I've never cussed at a buck as he ran away, but I did at that one. And it was a good thing I wasn't near any trees because I would have wrapped my frickin' bow around it so fast. Because, you know, it was totally the bow's fault. It was the deer's
Yeah.
fault. No, it was my fault. I sucked as a hunter, but I did make that stock perfect. Got right in there, got in close, and I was looking farther down that little ridge. I wasn't looking up at the top of just right on the back side of the ridge, which is where that whole herd had bedded earlier in the morning. It turned out they just fed behind there all morning. And they were just literally on the other side of a hill, and I couldn't see them. But man, I was so pissed, man. Just blew it. But it taught me a lot. Like I said, I learned a lot hunting that buck. One of the things I learned was patience and stalking only the buck that you want to hunt. Um, Stalking them only when they're bedded in a place that's conducive for a stalk. Because like I said, I stalked him everywhere I saw him, and had some close encounters, but I never even got to full draw on a legitimate shot on that buck.
Well, so what would you have done differently with that situation where he was bedded out there?
Nothing, honestly. I still feel like I executed that stalk well.
Yeah.
But the funny thing was, I knew this buck's home range, and I knew that I could pretty much see him anytime I went out there. And that one morning, I just didn't see him. And if I looked back on it now, I bet it was probably a full moon cycle, and they'd been up feeding most of the night. And in those, you tend to find bucks that bed real early. So I'm betting that's what happened, is I just didn't see him that morning because he bedded early. But I've also learned with that if they're bedding early, they're going to be up mid-morning to feed. So, just, yeah, it was one of those. I mean, that was only one of the close calls I had with him. I mean, I blew those stocks in many and creative ways.
So
but it was just inexperience.
What was so conducive for those deer to bed in that exact spot? Like what do you feel like was like made them want to bed there? Shade. Okay.
Shade. Yeah. I mean, that's I'm hunting pretty open country, and shade's almost always their number one concern.
Gotcha.
So,
and
early season, it's one of their number one concerns. Now later in the year, as it cools off, it's still, the shade gives them some cover and some protection. But yeah, it's shade.
And okay. So when you say shade, is that typically like a rock that might have an overhang on it that gives them a little bit of shade? Is it bushes? Like what kind of stuff
rocks,
are looking for there?
Bushes, blown down trees. I've seen them bed under the root ball of like a blown down tree. Just whatever provides them shade. I mean, it could just be on the backside of a hill where it's, the sun rising, and it's not going to hit them until, 11 or 12 o'clock. They'll just bed there wherever they can get some shade.
Yeah. And when you're looking at those types of places that are really open like that, I struggle in those areas as far as like, okay, everything looks open. Like, where do I start looking like for the deer? And I remember talking to Robbie Denning, and he was telling me it's like any sort of cover, and cover's relative toward those types of areas. He's like, just
yes, yeah.
And so I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that.
My son's first hunt's a great example of that. His first deer hunt, we knew I'd been up in a neighboring unit, and I learned just a little bit about the area, and knew that if there was, it was wide open sage country. There were pine covered hillsides up above, but there was a giant basin out there that you can hunt. I mean, when I say giant basin, it's like 30 miles across, and there's trees and stuff in there, but it's not the big high country stuff. The high country was just the roads were just total mud holes. And I'm like, I don't even want to screw around with that right now. I don't feel like chaining up and going up there and,
Yeah.
getting stuck for a day or two. But so we hunted that lower elevation down in the sage, but that sage had pockets of aspens, or it had pockets of just buckbrush and stuff. And that was what we really honed in on and focused on those. And he killed a couple bucks up there over the years, and every time it had to do with that. Like Robbie Denning said, and, hey, when Robbie talks, you should probably listen close,
Yeah.
because he's literally written books about mule deer hunting.
And I've
And
read
if you
them.
don't own the books, buy them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that little micro topography and micro cover. It means everything to him, man. I mean, you will see bucks bed out in the wide open sage, but even then, it's going to be like a bed that's dug out so that they can get just a little bit lower and find just a little bit of shade. And I mean that open country, that's where I thrive. That's where I do my best work. Is, I can glass it like crazy, and I feel that's one of my greatest strengths as a hunter is
Yeah.
my ability to glass. Um, with the second being my ability to just make the shot, and that's something that I work on. I work on that year round. I mean, I don't, some kid, a guy posted on Instagram yesterday, goes, "Hey, does anybody have their bows back out yet?" Like, I said, "What, you can put them away?" Like, why would you put your bow away? Come on.
Yeah.
I love shooting my bow. That thing brings me a lot of joy and
Yeah.
a great deal of stress relief throughout the year, So yeah, I don't. So that's that. But my shooting, I told you, I used to shoot a lot of tournaments, and I don't shoot a lot of tournaments anymore. But every shot I make now, when I go to an archery range, I go to a 3D range, especially, every shot I take that shot as if I'm getting ready to kill that mule deer, getting ready to kill that elk, getting ready to kill that red stag, which I'm never going to kill a red stag, but it just takes that level of preparation and focus. And then when you get to like the buck I shot in 2021, it was so cool. I that wide buck that my son shot that I was telling you about when he was 15, I had actually been at full draw on that buck 3 times in one morning, and I just couldn't get the shot I needed. I couldn't get the angle. He was through the brush too fast, through the opening too fast, or, a number of things, but I just couldn't get the shot I needed on him. So I sat there and watched that buck, and I was frustrated, but I knew there was another group of deer that I'd glassed from the other side of the basin that early that morning. And I'm like, if I get back up over this ridge, I think my morning's not over. So I got up there and I peeked over the top of the ridge, and oh my gosh, there's 5 more bucks that are feeding down there. And one of them, I saw a cheater on the outside, and I'm like, oh, that's dangerous. You don't want to show me a cheater. I like those too much. So as I'm looking at that cheater, he turned his head a little bit, and I saw a cheater on the inside of his rack, and I'm like, yeah, hey, I'm but a man. I can't pass this. So anyway, I looked down at him, and I'm like, all right. He was faced straight away from me. I'm like, all right, no shot, no shot, no shot. And I just sat there and watched him feed for a couple minutes. And finally he turned and gave me like almost a straight broadside shot. I could see the top like 2/3 of his body above the brush. And I'm like, you know what? This just all seems so familiar to me. And I'm like, I've hunted this spot before, and I've shot a buck or two there, but this scenario, this setup just seems so familiar to me. And I pulled up my rangefinder, clicked it 71 yards. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is almost the exact shot that we have at the Highlands Ranch 3D range, and on a mule deer in oak brush. I mean, I'm like, this. I have practiced this shot 300 times this year alone. So I drew back, And oh my gosh, I was so confident in that shot. Drew back, pin settled, shot broke. And as soon as that shot broke, I'm like, oh, he's not going to like that. And sure enough, he did not. And, but he went like 50, 60 yards and rolled down the hill dead. So, but it was that fact that I had practiced that shot so many times and I knew exactly what it was going to take for me to make that shot. And it was just really cool. I've never had a scenario that was that tailor made, from drawn from my own experiences. But yeah, it was pretty cool, So just staying focused at the 3D range and preparing yourself because I hunt out west, dude. I usually I'll on average I'll shoot two animals, a deer, an elk, or a deer and an antelope, or maybe a couple deer if I get an out of state tag, But truthfully, we don't get the reps that you guys do back there, So I mean, you can kind of build your experience shooting does and stuff like that, and we just not an option for us out here. So we've got to really be ready when those couple opportunities a year do present themselves.
Well, I will say, Henry, I'd say that's probably for the majority of whitetail hunters, but like where a lot, like in the Appalachian Mountain region, like where I'm at and everything, it's a low deer density. So honestly, like if I shoot 2 deer a year, that's a pretty good, those are hard. Yeah. Like, so I've always said that was always like a detriment to myself as far as like, I need to go to places that have more deer, and like where I hunt in West Virginia has a lot of deer, and I'm like, I'm making sure I'm getting a doe tag when I go down there because I need to practice more because I've found that is definitely a hole in my game is that closing moment, something that you've gained over the years. Maybe you don't have as many reps per year, but through the years of being able to do that. But like I know I struggle with it when I'm on the range. I feel pretty confident in my shooting, and then I get out in these situations, and it's like all of a sudden I kind of lose it a little bit. And I've gotten a lot better, and I've put a lot of effort into it, but it's just still that. Like last year with my elk, there's a film that's going to come out. I had this 360 inch bull there at 18 yards, and it was thick brush, and I was so focused on the shot that I wasn't focusing on what was around me, and there was too much brush, and I shouldn't have even shot. But like, it happened fast. It drew back, peep sight, scope housing, everything was clear through there. But the whole bigger picture, and like, I feel like when you get that, I don't know if that's still considered under the
vision there.
But you get under that killing instinct where somebody like you guys have is like. You're able to recognize, slow yourself down and recognize things a little bit more. And I still struggle with that in certain scenarios as far as like, okay, what? And I think that's where 3D archery helps a lot. And I'm a big fan of Total Archery Challenge, but the one thing that I think that I screw up with is when I go to these events, a lot of times, like I'm going with a group of guys and we always shoot these really long range courses, and that's great. But it also, I think there's as much benefit when I go to these local ones and shoot in the woods where there are branches and stuff, and you can see how your arrow is going and going through, and what your arc looks like of your arrow. Because that's where I screwed up on that elk hunt where it deflected because I didn't even know that it was there, and I've run into that situations enough times that I was just literally going through editing that film here yesterday, and I saw that bull come in again, and it still hurts just as bad as it did last September.
Still breaks your heart. Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, Beau, I think that's the difference. I mean, you those situations and those, just call them what they are. Those failures, those times we come up short of our goal. Those are motivating. And they can motivate you to become just more aware in that last moment. I mean, my whole approach to hunting is controlling the things that I can control, because there's so much of it that's out of our control. So for me, again, that's why I scout a lot. That's why I do a lot of preseason scouting. I mean, I live here, so it's easier for me. But that's one of my things that I'm focused on. I want to control the things that I can control. I can go find animals and be ready to make the move when the time's right. And I can be ready. I can spend a lot of time at the range and prepare myself for when that opportunity does hopefully come, that I will be ready to cash it in.
Yep.
And I mean, that's my thing. I just want to control the controllables, because so much of it, I mean, man, you can have a mountain lion move into the area and start killing a couple deer. And well, now, if the deer does stay there, he is going to be so on edge. I mean, you're going to have to be on your game to even get in the ballpark. It could be other hunters moving in and blowing him out from his primary spot to a secondary spot. And like last night, it was so funny. Last night I was telling you before we started recording, I went and shot this 3D league at one of the ranges that I'm a member of here in town. And Tom Klum was there from Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear. If you don't know Tom Klum, look him up. This guy is like a clinic in archery. And literally he's a level 4 NAA certified coach, which is the highest level of certification you can get. So he can coach Olympian. And the funny thing is, Tom's a trad guy. He owns this shop, Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear, here in Denver, that's traditional archery, primarily focused on traditional archery. And then they've got a compound side now too. But his son, Danny, he was talking last night to a friend of his afterwards, and he was talking about his son, Danny, and he goes, he's just the guy goes, yeah, he's one of the most successful hunters I've ever met. And he goes, yeah, and it's no accident. He goes, he's the guy who's out there with the spotting scope, sitting on a mountaintop, watching those bulls all summer. And he's watching, and he's making sure he knows where they're going, why they're going. And he pointed up at me and he goes, Henry does the same thing with deer. And one of the things I learned, and in fact, I think this might've been from a Robbie Denning podcast years ago, was to bump them and find out where their escape route is. So I'll do that if I'm hunting a new spot and I see a buck, a couple days in a row in a place, that I'm scouting. Now, this is very important. This is while I'm scouting, and I won't do this within a month of the hunt. So if I see one out there in late July, I'll sneak in like I'm going to hunt him, and I'll bump him and see where he goes. Because you can learn a lot from that. You can sit there as you watch them run away. You learn where their escape route is. That's important. You learn more, and equally important, you learn where their secondary home is, where, kind of their second safety zone is, where if somebody else comes in and, comes time for the season, and as it turns out, you're not the only rooster in the hen house. There's other people been scouting that same buck on the days you haven't been out there. Well, now, assuming they bump him on a stock, you know where to look for him. So, and that bit of information could be the difference between success and, going home with a story to tell and nothing in the back of the truck.
That's such an important piece, because again, I know I keep relating this to whitetails, but it's because that's kind of where my experience is and where a lot of these listeners are hunting. But that's the same exact thing that with whitetail bucks. Like, I feel like a lot of people, when they're hunting whitetails, especially in the big woods, you can't see them. They're worried about blowing them out. And sometimes this even happens during season. Like I'm not purposefully trying to blow them out, but if I blow one out, it's not the end of the world. I'm like, okay, I learned okay, he likes, he ran down over here. This is where he's going. This is where he was. Now I know exactly where he was bedded at. Now, is he going to lay there every day? No, but you have way more pieces of the puzzle together. And if he escaped, a little ways ahead of you and you didn't like almost step on him, he's probably going to come right back there because his plan worked.
Okay. So there's a question I want to ask you now. I'm going to be podcast host for a second here.
All right.
On your whitetail bucks, on a mature buck, if you bump him, how long on average is he gone? Or you do find that they come back, right?
Yeah, I do find they come back.
Because they've got, that's their home for a reason. It's got the food, the cover, and the water that they need to be able to eke out an existence there. So how long on average, if you bump them, are they gone?
I'd say a day or two at most. Yeah. Sometimes they'll come right back, like even that day, and come back. And I don't have a ton of personal experience of actually seeing it, but I've known that they come back.
A lot of experience with that one.
Is that what you see from a mule deer perspective?
Almost the same. It's they'll be back within 24 to 48 hours. If it's like a really hard bump, say you get a shot at it and it really scares him and he takes off, sometimes they'll be gone 3 days, but yeah, they're usually back there within 24 to 48 hours. Yeah, I figured it would be the same, but I just wanted to kind of confirm that.
Because and the way I look at it too is like, okay, now if he was bumped, multiple times in that spot, now it's going to change up the story a little bit. But that mature buck has chosen that spot because that's the best spot that he has found to be able to lay there. All the satellite bucks that are there, they're in the less, they're not in the best spot as he is. He's got he's the king, he's got the best spot, and he knows it works. He got away. So like, and it just makes sense to me like that. They're going to come back and lay in the spot. And I've seen that time and time again. And that's why, like, especially in a newer area, I'm more aggressive and not worrying if I end up bumping something, because it's like, okay, now I've just added some more knowledge to what this deer is doing.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You're just adding more you're adding more tools to your chest,
Yeah.
And each one that you add, you get a step closer.
Yeah. So that's really cool to hear that mule deer are similar in that aspect too. I mean, it makes sense. It's like, 'cause like, why would this deer, elk are different. They seem to go like 17 miles away, but like for deer, it's like, okay, why would I want to go to an area that I don't know well and don't know if this spot's really that good to lay down in, where I know this spot has worked? Like
well, yeah, I mean, and I'm sure you guys see the same thing. I mean, we have what I call historical, I just call them historical beds. I mean, where you would swear that deer have been walking up and pawing out that bed for 100 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're those deep beds with the, usually have good cover, good escape routes. And, they can either see you, smell you, or hear you as your approach. And I mean, let's face it, we're the least of their problems. Out here, mountain lions are hunting them every day. Clowns like us are out there for a couple months of the year, but they're much bigger threat as mountain lions.
Yeah.
And so if they can choose these spots, in these beds, so that they've got, a few of their senses that can alert them to danger, then they're going to go back to that bed over and over.
Yeah.
So
no, that's definitely, that's where the little difference is, as far as we don't have mountain lions. I mean, I think I saw one when I was 16, but I can't prove it. Other than that, they're not really here. So
I'll tell you, I think they're freaking everywhere. They are the most reclusive animals. You just don't see them a lot.
Yeah. And it's funny. This one quick side note was when I was elk hunting in Montana last year, I had this bull going. It was like day 18 of the hunt. And there was this bull right on this bench above us. It was right before dark. I'm down below and he's hammering. I'm like, he's just got to come off this bank on this trail and I'm going to have a shot. And all of a sudden he just shut up out of nowhere. And I'm like, checking, throwing milkweed. I'm like, wind's good. Like, what's going on? Couldn't figure it out. Well, my buddy Tim that was calling behind me, he had a camera that was up on that bench, a trail camera. And like months later, he went in to pull it And that day at that time, there was a big tom walking. It,
There
it
you
was
go.
only it was only 50 yards from us, and I never
Yeah.
saw it. And it's
Oh
just
yeah.
like,
Yeah. And that's where you become a real fan of grace, knowing that knowing that it had nothing to do with that you didn't get eaten by a mountain lion that day. It
yeah,
was literally the fact that that mountain lion was not digging your chili.
yeah,
But
I
yeah,
know.
and there's so many. I wonder how many times I have been in close range to mountain lions, and I mean, you know, I truly don't know. I honestly don't know, but I'm sure that the number, if I ever find out, is going to scare the piss out of me because
Yeah,
it's going to be a big number. But yeah, it's funny. I don't. They're so elusive, and I mean, and the funny thing is, for all the time that I spend glassing, I hunt an area that has a lot of cats. I mean, a lot of cats. We've hunted it in the winter. We've hunted mountain lions out there. I used to have a friend who was. I had a friend who used to have dogs, and we'd chase them out there. I have never glassed one up. I've glassed up everything. Bears, plenty of them. Every animal that lives on that landscape, I have glassed them up. I have never glassed up a freaking mountain lion. And so it tells me they're probably hunting more at night. But I mean, because most of the tracks that we find tend to have been made overnight.
yeah.
But yeah, it's still a pretty sobering thing. And I mean, I'm sure I'll have an unpleasant encounter at some point, but
I
I'm not in any hurry for it. And,
I
and I'm more prepared now because I'll either have bear spray or a sidearm on me. But
I've always like been intrigued by them. Like I want to see one, but I don't at the same time. Like last year when I was bear hunting in Montana, the same area I was elk hunting, we were going on this trail on the side through these cliffs and it was thick. And I was like, this trail was kind of weird because it was like about waist high down, all the brush was like kind of cleared out, and then all of a sudden we saw lion tracks in there. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're on a mountain lion trail going around the side of this mountain. And then my buddy was hunting on the other basin, and they saw a mountain lion come chase a deer past them, a mule deer at 40 yards. I mean, what they think happened was the lion was putting on a stalk and they bumped the deer, so it like prematurely
oh yeah,
had
yeah,
him
yeah.
had him kind of come out, and they said it was the wildest thing. It just ran right
Oh,
past
I
them,
bet. I
and
bet.
is yeah, but
We had so it's kind of funny. I shot a deer in 2007, and I had these two brothers that were just kind of getting into hunting, and I was kind of teaching them, big game hunting. They'd done a little bird hunting and stuff in the past, but we are going after big game, and um, so they came out and helped me. I met them, and they came out. I'd shot this buck. I got to signal, called them, and I'm like, hey, do you guys want to see how the other part of hunting works? The after a successful hunt, how you cut them up, how you get them back to the truck. And so anyway, they're like, oh yeah. So a couple hours later, they met me out there, and we're driving back out to this spot. And the funny thing was, we're in two separate vehicles, and I'm in the first one because I know where we're going, and I slam on the brakes. There's a mom, there's a female mountain lion and two cubs, but they're like sub-adult cubs. They're just about ready to go out on their own in the road right in front of us. And oh my gosh, it was crazy. It was so cool. They sat there and they like chased each other around and then ran up this hill to the side. And it was just one of those moments where you're like jaw on the ground. Did I just see what I just saw? Was that really what I just saw? And so anyway, the funny part was we get out, and I mean it was probably, I'll bet it's a 10-minute drive from there to where we parked and started heading in, because then so we parked, and then it was about a mile and a half in from the road where my buck was. And we're sitting back there, and these two brothers, Tim and Brad. Brad's the older brother, Tim's the younger brother, and Tim was the bully that night. Though he kept going. You know, hey, Brad, did you hear that in the brush? Was that the cats? You think they're here already? It was so funny. It made for a really funny night, but we didn't. I mean, man, we didn't get that buck out of there till probably 11:30 that night. But it was hilarious though, and you know the whole time I'm like, no, 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 don't worry about it, don't worry about it. They're way that was 10 miles away. Well, if you look on a map, it took us 10 minutes to drive there, but that's because we drove around the mountain and ended up almost back where we started. So it was a pretty fun night though, but that was a wonderful introduction to hunting for them. So
Yeah. I could imagine. I'm excited and kind of nervous at the same time when I go to Alaska this year to
that's good.
be
That's
in
hey, that's
grizzly.
the ultimate adventure there, man.
Yeah, be in some grizzly country because like right now I had bought a 10 millimeter and I was trying to figure out how because I always carried a 40 with me whenever I go anywhere else, but I was like I wanted a little bit more gun and
Sure.
trying to figure out how to carry it with my bino harness. It's like I got, everything just stacks, but I want to have it readily available rather than on my,
So
waist
there's a
belt.
couple options now.
Okay.
And I know for one, what the harness that you're using, does it have webbing on the bottom? Does it have like the mole webbing on the?
One of them does. I have two separate harnesses. The Sika one I have
Okay.
doesn't, and the marsupial gear one I have does.
So check with JC Custom Kydex. I think that's his handle.
Okay.
Guy out of South Dakota, and I actually picked up one of his that I'm just using on the waist belt on mine, but his new system will actually go underneath your harness, like at the bottom of it. If it
Yeah.
has the Mole webbing, it can hook onto that.
Oh, I'll check that
Um,
out.
there's another one. I'm a Badlands guy.
Yep.
They're new harnesses, and they've got four new ones this year that are pretty cool. I've been actually testing out a couple of them. And here's the funny thing: I've never been a harness guy, never been a bino harness guy. They've driven me crazy. They make you sweat too much, and there's too much noise at the moment of truth. If you're in close glass and something, I want something that I can get that in and out silently, and their new ones have addressed that. But yeah, so I will definitely be using one this year. Um, but they've got one that's really cool that actually hooks in behind the harness.
Okay.
So it's a real neat system too. So I'd check that one out too.
Yeah, no, because I bought a regular harness that goes like I figured I could like stack them and make it work, and it's just not the
No,
greatest.
it gets
It's
too
a
thick.
sweet
Yeah,
it's a sweet harness on its own, but it doesn't like it doesn't drop low enough to go below the harness. But then when it's too high, you couldn't really get to it anyways. So it's just
yeah,
like
it's too awkward an angle. Well,
yeah,
and let's face it. Here's the funny thing. I years ago I had a trail cam that I set up on this little water hole, and I took my wife in there and my at the time 1 year old son, and we went in and set up on this water hole. Um, Set this trail cam on a water hole, and this was in like May, so it was like way off season. We hike in there, and we found two mountain lion kills on the way back to this water hole. And my wife's like, so you hunt by yourself a lot. You're not hunting here by yourself, are you? I'm like, oh no, heavens no. Yeah, totally was. Um, and she goes, okay, that's fine. I don't mind you hunting by yourself, but you've got to have a better plan. What's your plan right now? If you see a mountain lion or an aggressive bear, I'm like, well, I got a bow. I'm a pretty good shot, And she goes, yeah, but what if you stumble upon it and it happens fast? I'm like, faith? I don't know. So anyway, she goes, all right, let's go buy a gun. So I talked to a buddy of mine who's a SWAT, he's a SWAT officer. And I'm like, all right, Fred, here's the deal. I need to buy a gun. What should I buy? And he goes, okay. And in the most condescending way possible, he goes, what kind of firearms training do you have? I said, well, as you know, I sell furniture. So, I mean, it's pretty extensive what we go through. I have no firearms training. Come on. He goes, yeah, buy bear spray. Oh, come on. Like, that's not the answer I want to hear at all. I got the green light to buy a gun. I'm going to buy a friggin' gun. So I go to Sportsman's Warehouse and I'm sitting there at the gun counter. I explain the situation to the guy and he goes, all right, so what kind of firearms training do you have? And I'm like, listen, did my buddy Fred set you up to this? Because this is bull crap, man. So he goes, all right, so tell me this. In 3 seconds or less, how confident are you can get the gun out of a holster and get 2 to 3 accurate shots on target? And I paused and he goes, buy bear spray. so I've had bear spray for years, and I've always got it on the waist belt of my pack. But this last year, I finally buy I bought a 40, and I've got that holster from the side. So and man, so I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what actually goes out to the mountains with me this year, but we'll see.
Yeah, so I've always ran my 40 either on my waist belt or it'll actually fit in the back of my harness because it's so small, and I can grab that. Like, there's like the cell phone pouch on some of them. It fits right in there, so that has worked. And I've had to draw it twice on bears here in PA just because it's so thick. Again, I'll get into these spots usually in the summer, and I accidentally get in between a mother and cubs. And I've had them, bluff charge me multiple times, and I'm like, "Don't make me do this." I got my gun pulled up, and they're like, the closest I got was about 10 feet. I mean, she was right there. I was close, and I'm like, "Don't make me do this." And of course, the cubs run up the tree behind me, and I'm just like, so I had to slowly back away. I'm like, just don't make me have to do this. But the last time I was in Alaska, I did carry bear spray, and because I have a rifle too, so it's like it's a little bit different with having that.
Totally.
So I don't know. It's just I understand that bear spray is probably just as effective, if not more, for being able to do that.
It just sprays such a wider pattern. It's not just one slug going at them.
Because I have the one that like hooks on my bino harness, and I could see me like having the nozzle flip the wrong way. It's just like hitting it and spraying myself in the eyes, and then I'm just like, all right, take me at this point.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, I'm right here. I'm well seasoned.
God has a different plan for me.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently, this is where it ends.
I'm better looking from above.
I'll tell you, we've had. I read a story years ago online. I think it was on Monster Muleys about a guy who was in his side-by-side, heading back to camp after his morning hunt, and somehow he had a bump and his bear spray triggered. And I mean, he goes, "Oh my gosh, the pain and discomfort that I experienced in that was beyond description." But he did a great job of describing it. It was a hilarious story, mostly because it didn't happen to me.
Yeah,
but yeah, pretty funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't hunted Alaska. It's something I'd love to do, but that's I having dual methods of bear protection would probably be a wise thing anyway.
Well, yeah, because I honestly wasn't thinking about it much because I was like, I have a rifle, and after I interviewed Adam Grenda, who's from Alaska, and he's part of like the YouTube channel Stuck in the Rut, and he goes, go watch this video of my wife and brother-in-law where they were brown bear hunting, and they shot one, and their gun jammed, and they couldn't get it, and it literally stalked them, came in at them, and they had to draw their pistol and end up shooting it with a 454 at like really close range. And he's like, having backup protection, no matter how good you think your gun is, you just don't know what can happen. Especially on a bow hunt, but like, you just don't know. And that, that kind of stuck in my mind. So whether it's bear spray, or if I end up, and that's the other thing. My brother's a gunsmith. He's a big gun guy, and I'm not. I've always been the bow guy kind of thing, so I'm less familiar with that. And he's funny. He's real stern with me, but he's like, you got that holster. You got to figure that out, and you need to practice with it. Like, we need to get you out there and make sure you know how to draw and go through. And he's 100% accurate, but he's just like, don't think just because you got this gun that you're foolproof now.
Dude, the same thing applies to that bear spray. They make the inert bottles, so you can get that and practice with that. Because truthfully, dude, I've sat there and I've walked through some country, late, where you're like, okay, we have chased mountain lions through here. We have literally chased mountain lions through here. I know there's a couple of dens back here, and I know I am not in a real strong position. So I've walked through some of those, with that bear spray, like my hand on it, ready to go. But I mean, truthfully, I know how it operates. I'm comfortable with how it operates, but I'm going to grab a couple of those inert ones and just so I can try that and get used to it. And, it's like anything, like your brother said, I mean, having that gun's cool, and it gives you some level of protection, but making sure that you are absolutely competent with it is a whole hell of a lot more important.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I have now, I also have a 22 pistol that I plan on just plinking with, because it's something that, shooting, 10 millimeter all the time isn't as realistic as just, getting familiar with just shooting pistols more. And it's helpful. And the bear spray thing, I think that's such a good idea, because like sometimes I look at it and it's a very simple system to make it go off, but it, in the moment of truth, if you've never practiced it, how do you know if you're actually going to be able to do it the way that it's supposed to happen?
Exactly. It's tricky. I mean, but hey, it's that, like I said, it's all about controlling the things you can control and making sure you're prepared for it. That's part of it. So,
yeah, no. And, well, Henry, I apologize for keeping you over a lot of time that I had said there. I just get excited talking about hunting, and this tends to happen more often than not. But people can check out your stuff at Chief Wackabuck on Instagram.
Big Chief Wackabuck.
Big Chief Wackabuck. Yeah. I'll make sure I put that in the show notes there. But also, just give a pitch for Colorado Bowhunter Association, which I know you're
you bet
active in. Yeah.
I'm not only active in it, I've been the chairman for the last 2 years. So
okay, well there you go.
I still think they could have chosen better, but it's my time to serve. So, but no, we're a 50-plus-year-old organization that was started by and still run by passionate volunteers. We don't have a single paid position on our staff. And we work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on season structures, season dates, tag allocations. We work with them on, we've done some work on sheep counts in the past. We just had our guy in the Southwest just did a sheep count with his local officer a couple of weeks ago. We were active with the Colorado State Legislature in working on things like last year we were able to get something passed that will allow hunters education to be taught in schools in 7th grade statewide. So, districts have to opt into that, but it's something that, this serves a bigger purpose than just teaching people how to hunt. Hunter ed teaches you a lot about wildlife management and can help voters to make more informed decisions later on in life, even if they choose not to hunt. That's kind of stuff that we do a lot of, and we're real active in both of those and have a good reputation within both of those organizations. And that's been very effective in helping us to keep seasons as they should be and make sure that bow hunters are represented well.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible. And how can people support that if they wanted to support it?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a great time to ask that. We just started a huge giveaway last week, or actually earlier this week. We've got a couple of custom made trad quivers in there. We've got a Badlands bow case, we've got some Maven binoculars, and $1,000 gift card to Shields for people who join. So for us, we send out 6 big full color magazines a year, which has updates on, legislative actions, parks and wildlife actions, stuff like that. But also has, Colorado's lucky. We've got some of the best bow hunters in the world that live here, and some of the best tournament shooters as well. So we've got a lot of content in the form of articles and hunt stories and stuff like that in there, tech articles. And we send out 6 of those magazines a year as part of your membership. $40 a year, and you can join by going to coloradobowhunting.org. And it's not the longest web address in the world, but it's in the top 5, I think. So yeah, coloradobowhunting.org. And there's a join us tab, and you can just click on that. And for $40 a year, you're a member. But I always encourage people who, Colorado is kind of the playground of the country. I mean, everybody comes out here to hunt. I always encourage people, if you hunt another state, you should join their bow hunting organization. Just to make sure you've got a voice in things. And we send out surveys quite often, a couple times a year, usually on different actions that we think we need to take. And, we're a member driven organization. So if people say, hey, we need to take action on this, then, the surveys will tell us if we need to or not.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you gave the background on that, because I learned more than I knew about it. Yeah. Well, so thank you.
Well, and every state's got one of these bow hunting organizations, and man, if you're a bow hunter, you need to get involved, because I can tell you right now, our rights and privileges are very much under fire.
Yeah.
And, it just takes people. You may not feel like you're the qualified person. I sure as hell felt like that when I stepped on the board, but here I am 7 years later, and it's a good organization, and these organizations only work if they have people who are willing to put in the work.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely.
So,
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Henry. I appreciate you coming on and
thanks for having me, Beau. It's been fun.
And this will make Tony Treach happy. So he had, I was with him last weekend. We were shooting at Total Archery Challenge in Seven Springs, and he said he was getting mad at me because I was doing too much whitetail stuff and steered away from some of the Western stuff. So he's like, he's like, I don't want to hear about stupid whitetails anymore. Like, I want you to get back to some of your roots. I was like, all right, I got you, Tony. So he'll
there you go.
This one.
Shout out to Tony.
All right, Henry. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks. You too. Take care, Beau.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.